Hey, this is Brad.
Hi, Brad. We had trouble trying to figure out how to unmute. Did everybody hear me okay? That's all.
Oh, I got you. I wondered.
Okay. And we've got a group here, and it is 6:01, so we're about a minute late. So I'm gonna try to keep the presentation to an hour. It's gonna be a little awkward because I'll probably be looking at the screen and the folks that are here since we've got dual audiences going. My name is Rachel Sinzi. I'm the Neighborhood Services Supervisor for the City of Jefferson. We do kind of a number of things. I like to tell people if it doesn't require an engineer in a neighborhood, it probably falls within our shop. So we do community development block grants, trash recycling, and historic preservation. In 2019, we formally adopted the historic preservation plan. Components within that plan include several code modifications. So internally, staff, we started taking a look at it and we realized that we probably needed to make this a formal review process and get a group of stakeholders to the table. So I really want to just start off by thanking everyone for volunteering your time and your efforts for this. And I think it will be, at the end of the day, we'll be able to provide a solid product that will hopefully help out the community. I want to go ahead and share the screen. You can see. Share content? Yep. I want to. Oh, there we go. Okay, so some of the things that we're going to go over today, we're going to introduce ourselves, and we'll talk about the roles and responsibilities of the stakeholder committee. We'll talk about historic preservation theory as a whole, as far as what happens nationally and also what happens in local communities. We'll review some of our historic preservation resources that you have at the table. For all those that are participating on the WebEx, we do have some resource books, which we'll have to get to you eventually. What it is, it's a physical copy of our 2019 historic preservation plan and a copy of the Secretary of Interior Standards for Historic Preservation. And then we'll talk about the process and what our expectations are within the city and also within this group. Oh, yeah. So first, I wanted to go ahead and allow everybody to introduce themselves. And I'll start. I already introduced, my name is Rachel Sinzi, the Neighborhood Services Supervisor. My background in historic preservation, I do have, my undergrad is from Southeast Missouri State University. I have a bachelor's in history and a minor in historic preservation. I have a master's from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, in public administration with an emphasis in history and nonprofits. So how I ended up with the city, I've been with the city for about a year and a half. A little over a year and a half now. I spent 8 years with Missouri State Parks doing grant writing and other various activities. And then I came over to the city. I'll go ahead and let the rest of the staff.
I'm Carly Rinkemeyer. I've been here for 11 months with the city. I graduated from Lincoln with a history and political science degree, and I have my master's of public administration from Missouri State.
I'm Ann Stroutman. I'm Neighborhood Services Specialist. I've been with the city for 10 years and since 2019 have been with the Neighborhood Services Division and basically solely working with the entitlement program. However, every once in a while, usually ask me to help out with other things as assigned. So I'm going to be the note taker tonight, or maybe from here on out. We'll see.
And then do we want to, let's just go ahead and introduce the folks that are on the WebEx. People.
Let me do a roll call at some point too.
Yeah, this is Brad. You want me to go ahead and go?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Brad Schaefer. I'm a licensed architect with the state of Missouri. Currently with FMDC, but before that I practiced commercial and private architecture for 16 years, with being at the state for a couple of years, and involved with a lot of different things with the city, with their facade improvement programs, the Board of Adjustments, and the Historic Preservation Commission, and that's about it.
Thanks, Brad. Do we have anybody else?
Hey, Brian.
Oh, Brian. Okay. All right, we want to just go around the room?
I'm Bunny Tricky Cotton. I'm a realtor with Remax Jefferson City. I'm also a state director for the Missouri Realtors. And I have sat on planning and zoning since Ann was there, so it's been a while. And so anyway, offered and volunteered to participate in this group.
Oliver Brown, retired, business owner. I've been in marketing and advertising for the last 20 years. And now I'm CEO of a food company called Strassen Foods. Hopefully going national within the next 10 years. I'm a community activist. Try to stay involved in the activities of the city. And the co-founder of the Lafayette Street and Historic Food District. And we also have a memorial in the city cemetery called Gone But Not Forgotten that we put together to honor those persons who had been buried in the city cemetery and now are there with no grave markers. So we placed a monument there for all their names to be placed there so that they will not be lost to the ages.
Donna Deeds, I'm chair of the Historic Preservation Commission at the present time and president of Historic City of Jefferson. Quote developer of sorts.
My name is Stacy Young. I'm appraisal associate at Nunn & Young here in Jefferson City for 26 years. I've sat on Board of Adjustment for
A long time.
a long time, several committees through the city area board of realtors and lots of other kind of philanthropic committees. I have a property on East Capitol.
I'm Steve Wiley, served on the city council for 3 terms a long time ago. Past president of the Historic City of Jefferson, past president of the Historic Preservation Commission. I have a business up on East Capitol Avenue in one of the historic homes. We've been in that place for about 38 years and very much involved with historic preservation and very interested in that.
My name is Doug Record. I'm an architect. I'm currently on the Planning and Zoning Commission, former Historic Preservation Commission, current board member of the Historic City of Jefferson, and currently work as a tax credit reviewer for the State Historic Preservation Office.
I'm Roger Youngmeyer, and I've been a history professor at Lincoln University, but I have done historic site nominations, primarily churches such as Taos, Russellville, and those areas. And don't, you can call me Roger. If you have a medical issue, don't call on me.
That's usually my line. Deborah Green, retired professor from Lincoln University, history. I've been retired, 3 years. I'm really celebrating that, but I'm very busy with that. I did the last 2 historic preservation, I don't know, drafts for Lincoln University. That's been a while though. It's been almost 20 years. My kid's 23, so almost 20 years since they've done something with historic preservation. And that's about it. I've done some Save Missouri work, but I've not. This is my first opportunity to work with the city of Jefferson, other than focus group, which I show up for.
I'm Holly Stitt. I'm the vice president of the Historic City of Jefferson. I sit as the chair of the Cultural Arts Commission for Jefferson City. I'm working through the code reviews for Jefferson City. I'm a developer. I currently own 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 properties on Capitol One Avenue, including the shoe factory, and for that I'm developer, as well as a historic one. Oh, there was another one, the Crappy Blue House, but and then I have one that I'm finishing up on Marshall. So I have a lot with historic buildings, and unfortunately, I lost a few to the tornado. So.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to stand up because I tried the presenting from the seat and it just feels awkward. So it might be strange for people on WebEx, but we'll just make do. Again, thank you, everyone, for being here. We couldn't do this without you. You want to click on the slideshow because I can forward slide. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about the roles and responsibilities of what we're doing here and how we're going to operate. So the roles, and as I mentioned at the beginning, city staff, we can write the code and then we realize that we're going to need to be making all these changes. It could be overwhelming if we threw it all out there at once. So we want to look at it kind of bit by bit and take that approach and maybe get feedback from this group. So what we'll do is staff will write the code. So starting tomorrow, we have a meeting tomorrow, we're going to work on drafting of that first section of code that we'll be talking about next week. We hope to kind of get the drafts out to you about 2 weeks in advance of this meeting, give you enough time to look. Oh, you got next week? No, next month. Sorry, I'm sorry. So 2 weeks before we meet next time. That way you guys can have enough time to look it over. Think about what you like and what you don't like about it, and maybe some either things that you feel will benefit kind of your section, and things that maybe will be an impediment. So we want to make sure that we find an even balance for preservation, but also for new development, because you can't have new development, or you can't have good preservation without incorporating new development into your process as well. So what we'll do is we'll research, we'll draft the code, we'll present the code amendments to you all, and then you guys take a look at it and give us the feedback, good, bad, and ugly. We want to know how that will impact you. One of the reasons why we kind of cast a wide net for people to serve on this committee is because we wanted to get folks that were in real estate. We wanted to get architects. We wanted to get people that were actively out working in this environment to make sure that we're, and I'm sure you all know, something can look good on paper, but then when you start the practice, you realize that maybe there's some things that you missed or weren't aware of throughout the process. So that's the whole reason why we're engaging in this exercise. One of the other things that we're hopeful that you do is when you report, we've got representatives from planning and zoning, representatives from historic City of Jefferson, the HPC, whatever bodies you're representing, Board of Realtors, please report back to them on a regular basis. That way they have an understanding of what's going on through this process, and let them be engaged in the process too. There's nothing secret about what we're doing. If you want to feel like you can share part of the code or a draft that we've written and you want somebody else to look at it, please feel free to do that. This is an open public process that we're going through, and we want as much engagement as we can get out of it. So we'll talk about what is historic preservation. We get this, our planner, it's like you need to identify what historic preservation is to people. Because, you know, what is history and what is important about historic preservation? Well, it's me, it's my stuff, right? It's what I think is important. It's about my history. It's about my background. And that's how you all feel too. So there's a little bit more to historic preservation as a practice, because we want to incorporate that feeling, that background of history, but also incorporate the other environments or the other components of historic preservation. So it kind of we start to go on the divide of what is historic preservation looked at legally, and then what do we want to look at historic preservation at in our community. So legally, we think about the Historic Preservation Act. Age and integrity are important. It has to be at least 50 years old, 100, 75, just 50. And even sometimes then you can, maybe if something is significant, you can get it on earlier. Maintaining original look and design within reason. Significance. Was there an event or an activity that occurred at that property that makes it significant? Was there a super important person that lived there, stayed there, looked at it? It just depends on what you're going for there. And the most prominent is probably architectural style. You'll see a lot of period of significance. If all the architecture, if it's a unique example of architecture, or if you have an area that is all kind of the same period of significance, that would be historic preservation. And then you have how it's practiced. So we've got a couple of pictures up there. The one in the upper left corner is 18th and Vine in Kansas City. That was a historic preservation revitalization. They took kind of an area that was significant for jazz and African American history, and they revitalized it back to what it was intended to be. Not quite the same, a little bit different, a little bit more touristy, but it drove back into economic development and took a blighted area and revitalized it. We also have the Cole County Courthouse. It's very small on the screen, but you could probably, without a sign, without realizing, you could probably walk up to that building and realize it was some form of government building just by its architectural style. You can identify it without having to know what it is. We have Trail of Tears State Park. It can also be something that doesn't exist but happened there. It can be the landscape. We also have the Bancroft School redevelopment in Kansas City. We highlighted that one because that is an old school, but it recently became LEED certified, lead certified. It's a green building. So they took, is it LEED? Thank you. LEED certification. So now you have a historic building that is also environmentally friendly. We have Ivy Terrace. That is an older picture. It's currently going under a restoration project to be a kind of a small wedding venue. Ranch homes. We get kind of pushed back on the ranch homes front, but they are architecturally significant and they are quintessentially American. You're not going to travel anywhere else in the world and see a whole lot of ranch homes. They are now eligible, and that's something that would probably go next if we look at National Register nominations. Benefits of historic preservation. There's kind of three components. You have the economic, the sustainability. Oh, did you have a question?
Could you go full screen with those slides?
Yes.
Thank you.
You can hit the little. Okay, is that better? Sorry. Okay, we have economic, sustainability, and social. Redevelopment hits two of them. Tourism brings in the dollars. It's a cute area. We've all been on vacation and went into a nice example of historic preservation where we did lots of shopping. We walked through downtown, the riverfront, whatever it was, we spent money there. Sustainability, redeveloping what already exists is greener than building new for lots of reasons. Reduce sprawl. We keep our kind of our urban footprint and we utilize our existing infrastructure instead of letting the old go bad and building new. Social, it allows you to preserve cultures that were in the area that settled the area. It's also a good way, you'll see here this term a lot of placemaking. This is our home, this is our history. We want to make sure that people that visit and that live here know what we're about. This is the other part that I get into this conversation a lot, especially when it comes to National Register and demolition or property rehab. So there's kind of two levels of historic preservation. National Register versus local designations. So the National Register is established by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. These properties are documented and evaluated according to uniform standards, and they are kept on kind of a roll by the National Park Service. There's a layered approach. You start off with an inventory, you take it to the state level, then it goes to the federal level. It is approved by the National Park Service and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Both there's a state level and a federal level. You can get National Register nomination, National Register status, and then turn around and demo your building the next day. There's no preservation police that are going to jump out of the bush and tell you to stop doing what you're doing. It doesn't exist. When historic preservation gets teeth is when you work with it on the local level. So local districts, landmarks, and this is where we really need this group together, because it really, how strong your preservation laws are based off of what community you live out of. So that's what we're doing. We're figuring out what level we're at and how we can preserve and also encourage economic development, but at the same time, keep that balance. We want to be balanced. Local historic districts, they are originated by the neighborhood and the property owners, not the city, not the state, not the feds. It's a grassroots effort. Criteria for nomination currently is codified in the City of Jefferson's Municipal Code in sections 8-44 through sections 8-45. That is the building code. Historic preservation, the establishment of a historic district, a local historic district, is in the building code. Historic preservation is actually scattered throughout our code. One of the things that we've looked at is maybe we should create its own chapter because it's in signs, it's in zoning. You're not going to, if you're going to be looking at it as a whole, you're going to pull up 5 or 6 different chapters of the municipal code. I think that's a problem. This group may not, but check it out. That may be one of the homework assignments. National Register versus local designations. National Register district sites. Owners of private structures listed on the National Register, not part of a historic district, are free to maintain or dispose of their property as they deem appropriate, provided that the action does not require a federal license, permit, or use federal funding. They are a national and state recognized. It's a kind of a feather in your cap. You can get neat plaques if you're individually designated. You can. It's basically a designation, but it also, that's how you get into the national, the federal, and the state historic tax credits. If you want to utilize those tax credits on your structure, then you have to be listed first or eligible. Local districts, landmarks, owners of private structures listed in a local district must get approval from the City of Jefferson Historic Preservation Commission for exterior changes right now. That's how as it is right now. So if you live in a local historic district and you want to put on a roof, you need to make sure you reference your design guidelines for property improvements to make sure it is an eligible material. And then it has to go through a review process. This is neighborhood driven grassroots. I'm not going to go and pursue a local historic district without the neighborhood coming through us first. We're not going to put that on property owners. Historic preservation resources, the goodies. One of the resources that you have in front of you is our 2019 historic preservation plan. This is a goodie. It is really good. Throughout the document, you're going to see kind of your standard data-driven plan, and then it's going to, what I like, it in the back, there's action items that we are supposed to pursue as a community to achieve the measurable outcomes that are outlined in this plan. So I like the plan. It's not kind of vague. It's very poignant action items that we should pursue. When you get time to review it, or if you have questions kind of on your own, you can kind of look through this and see if it's addressed there. The other book that you have is this. I will reference the Secretary of Interior Standards on historic preservation a lot. Those are kind of the standards that are put out by the federal government, and that's what kind of ties in that economic development and those historic preservation tax credits. So it is a very useful document to have. And you'll notice that it talks about everything from windows to roofs to additions to demolition to new construction. It'll kind of touch on all of those. So we want to make sure that our code falls in line with those standards, so that way folks can go ahead and get the tax credits if they're interested in. Not homework. Reference that. Okay. Oh, I already talked about it. So here's the preservation plan. We got there's some folks in there, went through a whole process. We did hire a consultant for that, Heritage Strategies. The project plan took about a year. Is that right? This was before my time. So about a year to get through with the consultant. Several stakeholder meetings, public meetings to come up with that document. So there's a lot of hard work that went into that in the first place. So we're going to talk about that. Secretary of Interior Standards. So these kind of get used interchangeably a lot. Preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. They all mean very, very different things. So when we're talking about this and we're going to put it in code, we want to make sure that we're using the technical term to make sure that people don't mistake their intended use. Preservation. You are going to preserve that building as it was originally placed there. You're going to keep it the exact same. You're not going to update the materials. You're going to try to preserve everything that's there. Rehabilitation. This is a lot of times associated with adaptive reuse. You have an old structure, but you're maybe not going to use it as a shoe factory anymore. Maybe you're going to do something different. So you keep the overall look and feel and the core principles of the structure, but you're maybe going to upgrade it to modern day use. That way that old building can still be useful today. Restoration. This is the Exchange Bank that's on downtown. This was a restoration project. That picture on the left is kind of what there's something about like the 60s through the 80s where everybody kind of put up false facades on the storefronts. We had that, on High Street as well. We still have some properties that have that. So what they did is they kind of took down that false front and they restored the front of the building. Still the same function, still the same use, but they returned it back to what its original look was. Reconstruction. Your resource is completely gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Little House on the Prairie cabin, not there, but they built a log cabin to give you the feel of being on the prairie with Laura Ingalls Wilder. This one is a lighthouse on Lake Pontchartrain. It was kind of their thing. Katrina wiped it out. So they felt like it was important enough to their community that they reconstructed. So that way that feeling was still there. Why are we doing this? So the purpose of revising the historic preservation code, we're gonna see the ugly underbelly of why we want to redo this. One, we want to provide clear procedures for citizens and staff. How, from everything from how to create a historic district to how to maintain it. And those that have been, those that are on the Historic Preservation Commission, either formally or currently, we know that we've ran into some gaps in our policy that don't allow us to do the things that we were intended, or maybe allow us to do the things that we shouldn't be doing. So we keep catching those in practice, and we want to get rid of that. One of the things that and this is just an example, lately we've been looking at the facade improvements committee. It's actually currently in the process of being eliminated as a committee, and the powers are going to be absorbed under the Historic Preservation Commission. When we were writing the code and the changes that went with it, the link that it was referenced, I think it was supposed to go to the Neighborhood Reinvestment Act. It went to medical marijuana facilities. So the historic preservation has nothing to do with medical marijuana facilities, but it was in our code. And it makes it hard as a staff person and as a citizen to be able to follow these processes, but the processes aren't clear or understandable. We want to clearly identify the roles of boards and commissions during the historic preservation process. Historic preservation is land use, and that's where planning and zoning comes in as well. We're not quite sure if the Board of Adjustment will be in there, but historic preservation needs to go through Historic Preservation Commission. Planning and zoning need to have a part of it, as well as the city council. But how does that workflow? And how does we make sure that we don't do redundant processes and make sure that it has a clean, clear, and concise process. We also want to align our local ordinances with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, to make sure that if property owners want to do historic tax credits, that they're not in violation of our code, which if you were doing in addition to your building, you probably would be. So in our current code, any additions have the setbacks that are required in our code do not align with the Secretary of Interior standards. So you'd be either violating code or not be able to get your tax credit. We don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that they fall in line. We also want to make sure that there is an repeals process for anything that is codified. Should be if circumstances change, if there's a tornado, if there is something different where your community has moved or shifted, they should be able to repeal that process. Citizens should always have an appeal process. If the Historic Preservation Commission says no to a design guideline treatment, they should be able to appeal to somebody else. And that shouldn't be the final word. Also enforcement. We have all the mechanisms right now in the existing code. We have nothing that says about enforcement. Well, what happens if they don't do these things? We have nothing, so therefore we can do nothing. That becomes a problem. Also implementing components of the historic preservation plan that you have in there, that you have in front of you. Some of the guidelines in the back. The action items request a certificate of appropriateness process, which we can get into that later. So what we've got to do, the timeline, I have up here 18 to 24 months. I know they're terrible. 18 to 24 months. It may be faster, maybe slower. It was just kind of an estimation based off of what other folks have done. But now that I've seen kind of the other committees, I think we can actually move a little bit quicker. Once this committee is done with its work, because we do have a draft code that we send through the process, then the committee that'll be it. That's its final, and we'll let you know. You won't show up and we're like, no, we ran the code through. You'll know when that process is going through, and it'll have to go through Historic Preservation Commission, Planning and Zoning, with Public Works and Planning, and then the council. So it'll be a multi-level process. Now, as a formal committee for the city of Jefferson, You do have to elect a chair and a vice chair of the committee. So this will be the last time that I'm leading this group, and it'll be one of you all. So, any takers? Well, I just threw that out there, didn't I? Brad, I remember you're on the phone. Maybe because you're not here, you should be voted in.
You just resigned from HPC.
I know. I better watch it. I'm pushing the volunteers. And the role of the chair, maybe I'll grease the wheels a little bit. The role of the chair is just to make sure that the meeting stays on task. It's not, you're not the head decision maker, nor do you have to be the most knowledgeable person about historic preservation in the room. You're just making sure that we march through the agenda according to Robert's Rules of Parliamentary Procedure, which is what we go by. And if you need Robert's Rules, we could get you a copy. But essentially, it's just making sure that you start the meeting on time, that you call the votes, and you send have the meeting go through its flow and its process.
So, but you're a voting member, it's not like at planning and zoning where it's a tie, you vote, or you're still
You're
voting?
still a voting member. Regular majority rules. Anybody interested?
I'm debating.
I volunteer.
Chair?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I would vice chair. The situation I am right now is rebuilding 518. So that kind of puts.
Here just sometimes so you don't volunteer.
So I don't know what kind of, we tried.
Yeah, I know.
Rachel, what do you surmise? I mean, what's the think tank? How much time are you?
I'm trying to be as much efficient with your time and my time as possible. I mentioned that we had other hats to wear. It's a lot. The federal funding that's coming down the pipe is like drinking from a fire hose. It's obscene. It's great, but it's a lot. So efficiency is a big deal for me. I don't want to take up any more of your time and as much as my own. And we meet, I'm trying to keep the meetings within an hour. That may come over. If it goes over time, that's up to you all. We will go ahead and create the agendas, but it's basically going to be, discuss this section of code. We kind of had the timeline, and did everybody get kind of the timeline that we had marched out? That's sort of like a syllabus a little bit. It may change, but that's kind of going to be the.
I was wondering if email.
Yeah, I should have printed out copies. But basically, I had that we could get done by December of 22. But we're gonna take three months to look at designation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to look at review, 1 for enforcement, 3 for responsibilities, and then 1 of an overall review. Do you want to go ahead and show them what we started doing when we started doing this exercise? We originally thought, well, we're just going to tweak the existing code and figure out, where we can start. Thank you. Where we can make the changes. And then as we went through, we were like, we probably need to make its own chapter. And then we kind of stopped. And then we went to the Historic Preservation Commission and told, we've been talking about this as an implementation tool for our plan. And Greg Benboom said, I think you need to get members of the community together to review this as you go through the process. So that's what we did. But just to give you an idea, so we kind of drafted based off of what was in existing. So this may change, but this is kind of if you scroll down the 3. So this is an outline of what we think a chapter would look like. You want to pull open the actual draft we have? I think it's that one. So this is actually the designations that we've drafted so far. How many pages is that? Is 4 pages. So this isn't a lengthy thing. Code shouldn't be lengthy. It should be clear. It should be concise. If you want to get lengthy and get into details, you create a design guideline document for your community. You say, this is when we're talking about, roof materials, when we're talking about setbacks, this is an example of what we're talking about. And those are the things that you're going to get in your Secretary of Interior standards. That is a guideline book. That's not what we're here to create. We're here to create the ability to do the things that are in that book. So the code itself should not be lengthy. As far as like what you're looking at those plans. So the review process, really will be, okay, we have this written down. This is the flow. What is that going to look like in reality? And that's why we have you all in the room, because we want you to walk through that process and think, how is that going to change my line of work? The way I look at historic preservation, the way this community looks at historic preservation, or my committee, or whoever we just want to make sure that we're not going to do anything that is a hindrance, and we want to preserve what we have. Because some of the things, it would be, and I brought this up with kind of the leadership, the city administrator, but what do you want to do with historic preservation? And to be candid, it feels like Jefferson City, I'm not from here originally, I've been here since 2008, 7, 8. And it feels like we're kind of sitting on the fence. Like we don't want to, we could completely raise the entire east side and start from scratch. Communities do that and it's successful, and that's okay. But that's not what this community wants to do. We want to preserve, we want to keep. I mean, unless that's not the case, then, but that seems to be the sentiment that we get when we talk about MSP, when we talk about the Central East Side, the South Side, Old Munichburg. Those are the places that people want to preserve, and they bring character and charm to Jefferson City. So let's do it in the best balanced way. Yeah.
Almost not able to stay in this chair. I was at the planning and zoning meeting when they talked about the city comprehensive revision for their city comprehensive plan. I'm a little perplexed at all of this planning that everybody's wanting to do. Nowhere have I heard incorporated in this planning is the remembrance of what was the Black community. You just talked about Munichburg. I mean, all the different facades around town. Lincoln University. What was left for the Black community that we can sit around and say, well, let's talk about historic preservation. The best we can do is talk about, well, this is an archaeological historic site. This is where this once was. Excuse me, where this once was. And so I'm a little perplexed as to, as I said, in planning and zoning, how are they going to address this disparity? How are you all wanting to address this disparity in writing and doing this code revision? I don't know. And so I'm really going to be sitting, anticipating, waiting to see how this situation will be addressed. And I'm hoping that over the next 48 months or whatever it's gonna be,
No,
that,
no.
that we can come out with something that, and Ms. Deeds will tell you, what was it, 3 years ago? I approached the city and the East Side Betterment Association. The last piece of property that could even be considered, because McCarty Street used to be the boundary line where blacks couldn't cross over. And so the only piece of ground is at the corner of Lafayette and McCarty Street. And I was wanting to put an economic development package there. And in remembrance to what used to be the historic Lafayette Foot District, something there. And I met opposition after opposition after opposition. So I'm hoping that somewhere in this process, that we will be able to incorporate into the thought process, how do we bring, because I believe in my heart, and this is very touching to me. Tulsa burning really moved me. And at that planning and zoning meeting, as I said, this was not Tulsa burning. We didn't burn down buildings and we didn't shoot people. But the resultant was the same. And so now, looking on a national level, how can we incorporate what other communities are doing to help bring back those areas that were obliterated?
And so some of those things we have to talk about. We have to have those conversations, because it is important, and I will, and this kind of segues into like a larger, but when subject matter like this comes up, and when we have questions and we don't really know how to take that approach, I can bring people in that have that information. We have the State Historic Preservation Office that's right here. I've told them about this process. They are more than willing to come in if we need them to come in. One of those folks is from Tulsa, and she worked directly on the project, as far as like in regards to it, being on the National Register. She left before it was finished, and I don't know that it is finished. So she might be a good resource to bring in and talk about that. How do we represent history that's no longer here? How do we do that?
I mean, that we're kind of what we're going for, because what we currently have, Glover, is a mess, quite honestly. It's not in an organized fashion that an issue such as that can be addressed at this point. I think that's where this is going, is to figure out what can we do, how can we do it? Because right now it's in this little piece or this little piece or this little piece, but there's nothing that is all contextual that they can actually take and say, this is how we can approach the subject, and this is how we can go about reconstruction.
Well, I would like to commend everybody that's sitting in this room. As I've said before, as a Black person, I'm very proud to say that my family has been in Missouri and central Missouri since the late 1700s. And so I want to commend everybody that at least we can sit down and discuss it. That's what I am viewing as a result of us all coming together, that we can discuss it. And that maybe with God's help and some really, as you say, honest discussion, maybe we can come up with a resolution that we could end these kinds of disparities. And so that's one of the main reasons why I decided to join this commission. And I thank everybody for being here and devoting your time to this effort, not only for the whole city, just for these few minutes that we've been talking about this issue, because this is something that really needs to be discussed. And I'm getting emotional, so I'll be quiet.
To kind of follow up on some of the other, this group will always, Historic Preservation Commission has a lot of things going. We are certified local government. So what that means is that we are eligible for up to 10% of historic preservation funds. The SHPO and state parks issues those grants. This year we've applied for 3. One of them is a resurvey of what is considered the historic East. There was a survey done in '92. It created the Capitol Avenue Historic District, National Register Historic District. Because the tornado went through, because of the flood, because of we want to look at it and see what resources we have to see if there's anything there to make another district or anything that's individual. We'll find out if we receive that grant in September.
What would that gain us?
What's that?
What would that gain us?
It would resurvey the resources that are there, and if there's enough to bring together a district or a standalone property,
Or to add to the district.
or to add to the district. So hypothetically, if this had been done There was a time when people were doing National Register nominations that they skipped. They didn't take blocks, city blocks, and look at them as a whole. They picked what buildings they thought would, look prettiest and put them on there. And that's what this one did. If it had been done properly, Simonson would already be in their tax credit review process because they would have already been listed on the National Register. There would have been other properties. Who knows? Who knows what it would have looked like?
Yet Street, that area.
We don't know because it just wasn't done correctly. So we're going back and doing it correctly. The next one is we made a commitment to West Main to keep surveying along. We surveyed Malenko Place, basically where the circles are, not including Hazelton, but just in a little bit on the West Main front. You can only survey realistically about 150 to 200 properties at a time before it gets too big of an area to do. So we kind of have to take bites. So the next bite we took was Lower Jefferson. It is currently a local conservation district. So we're going to go ahead and look at that for the National Register, and we'll just kind of keep going. The third grant that we applied for is a historic context. And that's literally the historiography of the development of Jefferson City based off of its development. And one of the things that you brought up is we talk about, when I said at the beginning, what is important, historically important? Well, it's mine. What's important in history is mine. And that's where it comes in. We don't know Black history in this community very well, like as a community. We don't have it documented. We don't have it written down and compiled and using it as an economic driver. We don't have it. We know that redlining and racial covenants were placed on subdivisions. I don't have a comprehensive view of where that is. I know it was Malenko Place because we did that one section of neighborhood. So we know that Black people were not allowed to even attend the subdivision meetings that they were having when they were developing. We know that, but we don't know where else that was happening. So we'd like to take a look at it and see if it lines up with some of the other things that we've got going. So just asking the question of where did it happen? When did it happen? What impact has it had? And then where do we go as a community from there? How do we move forward? So some of those are some of the things that we're also doing that maybe may not impact this committee. But if you ever have any questions or read something in the newspaper, we can discuss it in any time because it may have an impact on how the lens that you're viewing the code as you're going through this process. We're gonna have to circle back because we've got Bunny said chair, Stacy vice chair. We have to vote. Oh.
Resend that. Just time wise, we've done it before, Bunny. Do it again. You can do it. Just, you're thinking more than 2 hours Board of Adjustment? I mean, in terms of time, is it going to be comparable to time needed for Board of Adjustment? Do you foresee it laying out that way?
We're not, I think Board of Adjustment is kind of complex. You're looking at, making a change and you're looking at site plans and you're looking, and if you have multiples, that's where it can get time consuming. This one is, we're literally going to be kind of piecemealing.
Sure.
As we go through and as we talk about it, because I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about and make sure that we really think about it thoroughly before we move forward. And it may be that we compile it all together after we've done all that work and we look and we're like, oh, these things don't line up. And we're also going to have a process where we have our attorney take a peek at it to make sure that we're not violating any state laws that we're not aware of as far as zoning goes. But that's, I think staff are trying to take most of the work burden. We just want you all to review and give us feedback.
Good enough. Yeah, my understanding of even volunteering for chair is just to run the meeting. It's not to have any necessarily expertise or
Right.
further input. It's just to stay on task, which I like
We
to
can
do
do
when I'm in a meeting.
Parliamentary procedure.
If you're in a
We can
hurry,
do that.
if you're in a hurry, or you've got things to do, you want to be the chair.
Which is why I'm not.
Too many of those. Yes, that's fine.
Sure. I think, as the not chair, but forming a chair, I think there has to be a nomination and a second for the chair
I
and
move that Bunny and Stacy be chair and vice chair respectively.
I second.
all those in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Shush.
You was the captain of the ship, I follow you.
Now my
That's, that,
my duties are over.
that is a compliment.
Okay, well, they're not over yet, dear. No. I know. Okay, so now that we have the chair and the vice chair, then the only things that I would think about for this group now moving forward until our next meeting, and that was something else that I wanted to bring up. I selected the first Thursday of the month simply because most of the city commissions meet the second week of the month. And I wanted the information to be fresh in everybody's minds. That way they could report back to their standing bodies. If I know I requested of the planning and zoning, but if you can, please request to your bodies that this become a standing agenda item. That way it's consistently brought up and you're consistently giving them updates. However, if the chair, vice chair, or any of the other members of the committee would like to move the date and time, that is completely up to this body. Otherwise, the next meeting would be Thursday, August 5th, in this same room at 6 p.m. We'll go ahead and keep that going unless you guys want to chew on it and decide differently at the next.
And again, you're gonna send this information a couple weeks prior to
Yes.
prepare.
We will, so that process is, we will send you bites of the code so you can prepare, so you know what we're discussing and you can already have the review in mind. You will we publish, make the agenda public usually the week before. And if there's any packet items, you'll also be notified that there's packets. I don't anticipate, because we're gonna be sending the code out to you so far in advance, I don't really anticipate a whole lot of packet material in this group. If you get in your review process and you feel like you want more information, we have a wealth of knowledge within this building, within this community, or we can bring it in either virtually or in person. I mentioned the SHPO. I'd like to bring our building official in at some time. I'd like to bring our code enforcement manager in at some time, because everything kind of touches historic preservation, even if we don't always realize it. So it's important to know those types of things. But if you want to request, or if you know of somebody, let's do it. Let's just get the best product we can at the end of the day. The only thing I would ask, if you guys are interested, so this is not required, check out the current code. Do you guys know how to get to the city code? Or drive a bus? It's not altogether that intuitive. So when you go to the city's website. Oh. Yes, do you guys have, does everybody have one? Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, while Carly's pulling up the code, my team wonderfully made these membership forms. We'll compile these into a list. That way you have everybody's contact information, including ours. That way, if you guys want to have little sidebar meetings, I know what happens, let's just do this, that's fine. You guys can, if you want to discuss process or procedure with each other, we'll go ahead and get you everybody's contact information. So please fill out and return this form. You don't have to do it now, but eventually. Okay, when you go to the city's website, you hover over government, and then you'll see a section called city code. And it's all there. What I do is I type into the search bar historic preservation. And you'll see all the areas that it pops up. It's in chapter 3, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 15, chapter 25, 31, 35, and apparently in the, schedule of administrative fees. It's everywhere. Take a look at it, read some of the things and just, tear it apart. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. The other exercise that we did internally as staff that we kind of liked, we stalked other communities' codes. That's the way to do it. We're like, what, where do we like to visit and what do we like? What did we like about it? And then we looked up their code.
Do you have some examples?
Yeah.
Places that would be good to look at?
We did. So one of the places that we looked up, Lee Summit, I like their code because I like the way it incorporates their preservation commission with their planning and zoning. There's other things I don't like about it, but I like that flow. I like Denver, Colorado. You guys knew I was gonna bring that up. Because they have a unified government, they do county and city, so I was just interested to see what they had going on, and they just did a major code revision. They did exactly what we're about to do. And then the product that they produced was this really fancy schmancy design guidelines. It is beautiful, and I can send that to you all. But basically, it's almost like a developer's handbook when working in an older neighborhood. It tells you how to do new construction. It tells you how to rehab. It tells you how to restore. It tells you what do you do with infill development, which we have a huge problem with. It's okay to have new construction in an older section of your town. In fact, it's preferable. And to a certain extent, and you also don't want to hinder new architecture. It's hard to say that when you're in the moment, but you could have a huge architectural gap in your community if you're not allowing the new to come in, or everybody else will be celebrating it in 150 years and we're not going to have anything because we didn't allow it. You went to Denver, pull up their design guidelines. That's what she said. There should be an entire document. Yeah, that blue bar right there. Yeah, this one? Yep. It might take a minute to, I also looked up Denver's a little bit big. It's big. Same ingredients, they just made a larger cake, right? But this is the document that they produced. And it has nice workflow and it's very easy to look at. They have the intro, they talk about preserving, they talk about grant funding that could go along with your preservation projects. So they kind of tie everything together. They have workflows that I really like. So that way you're not going to, as a property owner, if you live in a historic district, you don't have, every time you want to do something to the outside facade, if you require a permit, there's a staff level review and then there's the process. We don't want to make everybody go through the process each and every time. That's annoying. But it tells you, well, I'm a homeowner too. I'm a homeowner. So we're trying to make this as smooth as possible. For example, currently we have historic preservation has a demolition code. Obviously, the building department has a demolition code. We have 2 separate applications and 2 separate processes for each. It's silly. It doesn't need to happen that way. We could streamline it. So what you'll see in there, and they have great pictures and examples. And at the end, can you scroll like all the way to the end? They have their each individual neighborhood's guidelines. So they're talking about preservation as a whole. This is what we're talking about when we talk about setbacks and roof lines. But then they have their Wolf Place Historic District and what the character defining features are of that district. They talk about materials, they talk about roofs, they talk about doors, they talk about windows. And they show you the examples of that neighborhood. Because you can't apply the same rules to everywhere in the community because they have different features and characteristics that you want to highlight. And you'll see their nice little map that they have there. So this would be where we could have guidelines almost exactly like Denver, we just wouldn't have as many appendices. We don't have as many neighborhoods. Or we could go a different route, but you all have been somewhere that you really enjoyed the historic character of, that you liked what they were doing for their history. Maybe look at Tulsa and see how they're doing it. Take a peek at their code. It's a mess.
It's a mess.
Codes are always a mess. So with that, you guys have any questions before we adjourn? I'll let the chair and the vice chair go ahead and say that. Everybody have a clear kind of understanding of expectations and ready to wade through. It's gonna be exciting.
We adjourn. Second? All those in favor? Aye. All
Right, thank you, everyone.
Be with you. We can leave our little signs here for you to read.
Sure, they can put them out. Do you want to take it home?
God bless you. I know it's tiring.